Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 34th Charles H. Thompson Lecture Colloquium Series. My name is Aaron Stills, and I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Charles H. Thompson Lecture Colloquium Series. So since 1980, this committee has identified an exceptional scholar to lecture on cutting-edge issues and creative innovations in education. And tonight we have identified another keynoter, Dr. Ronald Ferguson from Harvard University. And Dr. Ferguson, we would like to recognize you and welcome you to the Real HU. Hampton got out of the competition, so welcome. So this one is most important because if some of you who were here for the 28th lecture, you may have remembered that Dr. Pedro Negura of New York University presented on the significance of race in the racial achievement gap. So tonight we'll have another discussion on this most important topic. So to get us started, why don't we give a round of applause for our Dean, Leslie Fenwick, who will bring greetings from the School of Education.
Good afternoon. The Charles Thompson Lecture Committee is to be lauded once again for securing our lecturer, Dr. Ronald Ferguson. So I'm going to ask the members of the committee to please stand to be recognized. Don't be shy. This small but mighty committee and J&E staff, Ms. Linda Hill, Ms. Joseph, our editor-in-chief, Dr. Thompson, and Dr. Stills, thank you for bringing us Dr. Ferguson, a true warrior scholar, someone who we believe has used his deep tissue knowledge about economics, schooling, and children to advance policy and practice perspectives and agendas that are fair and corrective. Let me pause as well to ask the School of Education faculty to stand and be recognized. There are faculty here, past and present. These are the individuals who ensure that a new generation of researchers and practitioners are knowledgeable and committed to eradicating education and social ills that stand in the way of individuals actualizing their full potential. Charles Thompson founded the Journal of Negro Education, affectionately called J&E, to be the voice of advocacy and egalitarianism, each of which Dr. Ferguson, our lecturer, epitomizes. He has consistently offered a nuanced analysis of the economic factors impacting access and equity and provided meaningful and accessible solutions which affirm our moral commitment to do better. Dr. Ferguson, the faculty, the students, alumni, and I join me in welcoming you to the vigilant lineage of the Journal of Negro Education and the Charles Thompson Lecture Series. Eminent historian Carter G. Woodson is quoted as saying, "Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose inspiration." Begun in 1932, the Journal of Negro Education is one of the Academy's oldest, continuously published refereed journals examining issues incident to the education of black people. There is no greater transdisciplinary repository of great black thinkers than J&E, which can claim among its own, and graduate students, write these names down if you've not already heard them, Horace Mann Bond, W.E.B. Du Bois, Ralph Bunche, John Hope Franklin, Edmund Gordon, Carol Camp Yeeke, Asa Hilliard, E. Franklin Frazier, Malima Suja, Charles Hamilton Houston, and our own Dr. Ferguson, among others. In so many ways, J&E and the Thompson Lecture affirm the aphorism, "The past is prologue." Today, right now, the nation is fixated on mending the achievement gap, which is more appropriately named the Opportunity to Learn gap. But this conversation is not new for our scholarly community at Howard University. In 1932, JNE presented a comparative study of academic achievement, educational access, and an analysis of the Negro teaching force. Today, the nation is fixated on the incidence of obesity, particularly in minority communities. The summer 1937 issue of JNE was entirely devoted to the health status of blacks. Today, the nation is engaged in a national debate about the rigor of teacher preparation programs. The fall 1938 issue of JNE examined the rise of teacher training. And today, every sector of society speaks about globalization. But the summer 1947 issue of JNE espoused, and I quote, an education for one world. The founder of JNE, Charles Thompson, died in 1980, and a Washington Post obituary stated that he left no immediate survivors. We know, however, that he left the Journal of Negro Education. The journal and this lecture series represents the unrelenting press to right what is wrong. Dr. Ferguson, your voice is one among noted others who press to right what is wrong. If you have not read Dr. Ferguson's books, please add them to your reading list. So, Dr. Ferguson, again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for adding to this vigilant lineage of scholars. We welcome this opportunity to hear from you this evening.
Thank you, Dean Fenwick. And moving ahead here, at this time, we'll have Dr. Ivory Thompson, who currently serves as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education. And recently he has another title. It was sort of a bittersweet kind of title. I really miss him on the floor now, but as you know, President Obama has appointed him as the deputy director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs. So let's give him a warm round of applause.
All right. Good evening. It's very good to be home among my family, to be with Dr. Stills, who graciously gave me this suit as a parting present. I call it a part of my Stills collection. So Dean Fenwick told us about the history of the Journal of Negro Education. I'm going to talk a little bit about our present and our future. This year, the Journal of Negro Education moved up 100% in its impact score. Last year, we were ranked 44 out of 118 social science journals. Today, we rank 15 out of 123. And we also rank number 3 among all black American journals. The Journal of Black Psychology ranks number 1, and the Journal of Black Studies ranks number 2. And we have the distinction of being number 1 among journals who still have Negro in the title. We also moved to a digital format this year, so now we have both the print and the electronic subscription option. This year, since we have done the electronic subscription option, we have gained over 100 new subscribers, and a lot of them in international countries, including 5 from Australia, which would really surprise me. We have one from New Zealand, Switzerland, Thailand, Turkey. We have our first ever subscription in South America, Sao Paulo University, and a library in Poland. So the Journal of Negro Education is making great strides, and I'm very proud of our staff and our reviewers, our contributors, and everyone who's committed to the greatness of the journal. I want to invite all of the graduate students, all of our faculty members to think of the Journal of Negro Education as a possible outlet for your work. We have made great strides, and the only way we have been able to do that is through the dedication of the faculty and the scholarship that we invite. About 10 years ago, and I shared this earlier today with our newly appointed Board of Visitors to the School of Education. About 10 years ago, when I was a young faculty member, I submitted an article to a top-tier journal, and I got a rejection. And there were there was a phrase in that rejection that stuck with me. They found that my article was emotionally loaded and needlessly contentious. So that was the first review I ever got. That was kind of a blow to my ego at the time. And it had me thinking about, what kind of scholar I needed to be in order to fit into the academy. 10 years later, I've gotten opportunities to publish in a variety of different outlets, from top-tier journals to blogs to monographs. And one of the things that I realized recently, and this was from a young scholar who said that she found one of my articles and she used it to frame a graduation speech. And she was very flattering of that journal, but she called me justifiably angry and sufficiently arrogant. So I realized that in 10 years, I hadn't changed that much. So I'm glad I didn't let a petty blind reviewer suppress my emotions and cause me to fear confrontation simply to appease a gatekeeper of an arena that has no respect for me or my people. Black scholar activists, be emotional, be contentious, be angry, be arrogant, and be brave. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Hughes now will come and introduce our keynote speaker.
Good evening. Ronald Franklin Ferguson grew up the eldest of 5 boys in a blue-collar section of Cleveland. Getting a good education was a top priority for his family. So it shouldn't surprise us as he grew up and later on earned a Bachelor of Science degree in economics from Cornell University and a PhD in economics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. At present, however, Dr. Ronald F. Ferguson is Senior Lecturer in Education and Public Policy and also Faculty Co-Director of the Pathways to Prosperity Project in the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Dr. Ferguson is also Senior Lecturer in the John F. Kennedy School of Government and an economist and Senior Research Associate at the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy, again, at Harvard. And additionally, he is faculty, co-chair, and director of the Achievement Gap, guess where? At Harvard. Over the last 3 decades, Dr. Ferguson's teaching, research, and consulting have focused on reducing economic and educational disparities. In fact, his recent work has attracted wide attention. He is the creator of the Tripod Project for School Improvement, and the survey tools that were developed as part of that project have also been used along with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation project on measures of effective teaching to predict learning gains in public school classrooms. Another report of his, titled Pathways to Prosperity, has contributed greatly to the national debate on how to help all youth, not just those who are college-bound, to transition successfully from school to work. And of course, we all want to get a copy of Dr. Ferguson's most recent book titled Toward Excellence with Equity, an Emergent Vision for Closing the Achievement Gap. This evening, the title of Dr. Ferguson's lecture is Elements of a 21st Century Movement for Excellence with Equity. Please give Dr. Ferguson your undivided attention.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I want to thank the committee that nominated me to give this talk. As you just heard, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And I can remember the day I was about 12 years old. I was on my paper route collecting for the paper. It was the first moment it ever occurred to me that I might possibly teach in a university. I was wearing a Howard University sweatshirt. And I remember that moment because it was such a big thought. You know, you think about, I was thinking, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I thought about a bunch of things. I said, well, I like school, so maybe I'd be a teacher. And I said, well, but what comes after is college, too. And then why not teach in college? And for a kid whose father was a bus driver and a house painter and whose mother was a stay-at-home mother, teaching at college was kind of a big thought at that time. But I had teachers and relatives who encouraged me. My grandmother always used to say, you want to be somebody. She lived to be 100 years old. And I can remember, I knew her mother. And her husband one day, I can remember a conversation where he sat down. He was 94 at the time. And he basically said, my life is almost over, but we're still going to make it. And I want you, don't you ever stop remembering that I love you. And so when I think about why we're here today and what the agenda is, we're carrying on a legacy that started long before we were ever born. Those of you who are my age, we're children of the Civil Rights era. And our parents paid a heavy price for us to be where we are today. The grandmother I just mentioned, her father disappeared when she was 14 years old. They lived in the South at the time. They found his car and his tools, but they told him they never found him. My guess is they did find him, but they didn't want to tell her the condition he was in when they found him. Okay, and so we owe it to all those folks to do what we can. I suspect that in most of your families, there are members of the family who are not doing very well. Branches of the family where people still are not finishing high school, where the kids are struggling, where they're having a hard time paying the rent, where there's drug addiction and alcohol abuse and all that, and we're still all of our extended families. I come from a family of 5 boys. 3 of us did well, 2 of us did not. 1 still has cocaine abuse problems. 1 died at age 39 of problems associated with alcohol abuse, and so on. So as I talk today, I mean, maybe each of us can think of one child that we really love or one branch of the family that we really love and we want to have prosper and thrive and do better in life than they do right now. And think about what's it going to take to have all of us do well and not just some of us do well. And my focus is going to be on the lived experiences that we want our kids to have and what we need to do in order to produce those lived experiences. And first I'm going to talk more about a few numbers and a few big ideas and big patterns. And in general, I'm going to be talking about the big idea that this is social movement time again. Okay, a lot of us lived through the civil rights movement, which is not over yet, but we think about what's the movement for today. I like to call it the movement for excellence with equity. There are lots of people popping up around the country trying to find ways to help, trying to find ways to contribute and be helpful. And people talk about closing the achievement gap as being the civil rights challenge of the day. In some ways it is that, but even during the civil rights movement, there were other challenges. One was, who remembers Sputnik? Okay, there's some folks early. Remember the sense of urgency when Sputnik happened? Okay, the Russians got to space before we did. And Khrushchev was saying that they were going to dominate us technologically and intellectually at the time. And there was a lot of energy in the United States to improve the quality of schooling, to improve access to schooling that came along with the Sputnik. It wasn't a movement, but the Sputnik event, so to speak. Okay? And just as much as we need access to resources and rights in the way that the civil rights movement pushes for progress, we also need skills in the way that Sputnik motivated us to want to get those skills, and the way that the Nation at Risk report in 1983 also was a spark that generated a lot of energy. And I want to suggest that a lot of what we need to do in order to improve young people's experiences are things that the people who need to deliver those experiences don't necessarily even know what it looks like. Okay, when we think about the everyday experiences that kids have, there are schools where neither the leaders nor the teacher even knows what a great school looks like. Okay, there are lots of families that don't know what maximally effective parenting looks like. There are kids who don't understand the impact that their behavior has on their younger siblings and their friends and classmates. Okay, so there's a lot of information that we need to get out to people, a lot of examples and motivation and social support and reinforcement to have us all live up to the lifestyles and the habits, ways of interacting with each other that can help all of us to do better. And I want to talk about those things. And a lot of it's about harnessing latent potential. There's a saying that Reverend Robert Schuller used to say that was, any fool can count the seeds in an apple. Counting the seeds in an apple is like counting points on a test. Okay, but only God can count the apples in a seed. And what we're about is trying to harvest more apples from the seed by effectively cultivating human potential. All right? I write poems for teachers. I work in schools sometimes, and when I go in, I often will start with a poem. Because I have a lot to say, I'm going to start with a really short poem so I can get on to some of the other things I want to cover. I may come back later and do another poem or two, but there's one just that's in the spirit of harvesting latent potential. And it goes as follows. Sure as sunlight. There's a child here in your caring who may someday cure all cancer, but you've got to lay the groundwork so that it can come to pass. She's a child who hasn't blossomed, so you cannot see her brilliance, but as sure as there's sunlight, she's here, now, in your class. I can't tell you what her name is, nor her height, nor weight, nor color, only that she is potentially a history-making lass. Okay. Now, in my neighborhood, we didn't say the word lass, but I need something that rhymed, right? All right. So, anyway, let's move along. So I want to touch on a number of things. The notion of excellence with group. Well, first of all, what I already said pretty much, we need to move assertively to enrich children's lived experiences in order to build the skills and dispositions necessary to thrive in the 21st century. So what about those lived experiences? And I'm going to talk about home life, school life, interaction with peers, the roles of local employers and community in pulling all that together. The goal being what I call excellence with group proportional equality, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. We want to promote a sense of urgency and possibility in the sense of movement. Okay. We're talking, as I said, teaching, parenting, school culture, employers and civic organizations, and collective responsibility are all things I'm going to touch on. It's too much to try to talk about in this time, but can't resist the temptation to try to give you the big picture on these things. Now, purport excellence with group proportional equality. Each group tends to have a bell-shaped curve of achievement. Think about test scores here. And for black folks and Latinos or Hispanics in the United States right now, it's very similar curves for those two groups. Let's imagine this is the bell-shaped curve for marketable skills that our kids have right now. Part of what we mean by the Achievement Gap Initiative is that whites in particular are on a higher curve. Achievement Gap Initiative. By the Achievement Gap. What we mean by the Achievement Gap is that whites in particular are on a higher curve. There's a lot of overlap in those curves. We often don't stop to acknowledge that there are huge numbers of African Americans and Latinos that do much better than huge numbers of whites. Okay, but if you just look at the average and the central tendencies, whites are doing better, and they're doing a lot better in some cases. So by the time they finish high school, and with regard to skill measures, whites are 3 to 4 years ahead of blacks and Latinos. I'm going to argue that that's not necessarily doesn't need to be a permanent condition. We can do something about that. I'll come back to it. But the goal is to move both those curves up. We're not just trying to close the achievement gap. We're also trying to achieve excellence. So ultimately, where we want to get to is that green curve. And when we get to that green curve, the idea is that race and ethnicity should contain zero information about skills. Knowing somebody's race or ethnicity should not give you a clue what their test scores or their jobs or their earnings are likely to be. There's a certain percentage of folks that are going to have higher skills than others, be under the top tail of the curve, and lots of people under the middle and some under the bottom tail. But group proportional equality means each group represents the same fraction of the folks under each part of that curve. So it's not just about closing achievement gaps, it's about moving everybody up. So by the time we close the gap, we also have excellence. I'll show you in a second, even our white kids are not leading the world, especially in math anymore. Okay, so why so much urgency to get this done? Well, one thing that's happening now is our nation is becoming quickly folks of color. The highest achieving group tends to be whites right now. If you look at people who are age 80 and over, more than 80% of the folks, as of the last census, were white. So more than 80% of the people ages 80 or over as of the 2010 census were white. If you look at the children ages 5 and younger, this chart says that only 52% were white. It's already the case that the majority of babies born in the United States are babies of color. Pretty soon it's going to be the case that the majority of kids in public schools or schools in general are going to be children of color, and then the majority of our entry-level workforce. This is going to be a nation with no majority, no racial majority. Okay. If we don't raise the achievement levels across the entire populations, but particularly among the groups that are achieving at lower levels, we're really sliding backward in the community of nations with regard to our skill levels and with regard to our capacity to compete internationally and just to have the sense of ourselves as a preeminent nation that we've had for so long. And again, we can do this, but we won't do it by accident. It's got to be done on purpose. And I submit to you that there are lots of people stepping up now trying to be a part of the answer, but I think it's important that we start to understand all of our collective endeavors as part of a shared sense of purpose, that we're not just a lot of miscellaneous people trying to do good, that we are actually part of a movement trying to shape our destiny for this century. This chart here, I know the letters are really small. You can't see any detail, but you can see the red bars among the blue. Well, this combined reading literacy scores for 15-year-olds among the developed nations of the world. Each one of those bars represents a nation, except the blue ones represent subgroups in the United States. The red ones represent subgroups within the United States. The farthest red bar out to the far right, where you see 541, those are the literacy scores of Asian students in the United States, Asian Americans. The second red bar, where you see 525, is the literacy scores of white Americans at age 15. The 500 is the average for the United States. The 466 at the far left are Latinos or Hispanics in the United States, and the 441 is African Americans. There's work to do. Okay? As the population shifts toward being higher percentages Black and Latino, we're moving down toward that tail. We don't have to stay there, but again, we won't move that needle by accident. This is math problem solving. For math problem solving, you see the 505 and the 506 right there toward the middle. Those are, the 506 is whites, the 505 is Asians in the United States. You'll see those are not up at the top left, top right anymore. White Americans rank 15th. If white Americans were a nation, they would rank 15th in math problem solving among developed nations. So there's a gap there too. It's not just about folks of color that need to get better here. These data are from 2003. The data that will be the next time we can actually break it out by race will come out next month in December. If I'd been a month later, I could have shown you the more up-to-date numbers. But they probably haven't changed that much, unfortunately. All right. So the main point I want to make with this chart is that all of us need to get better. Okay, excellence with equity is about moving all the groups up. So all 4 of those red lines end up at the far right margin on this chart. Now, something that could be viewed as a positive is that if you just look at numbers of high achievers, there are, here it says, in both reading and math, the U.S. produces more high achievers than France, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. We're a big nation. So if you just look like numbers of high achievers, we got a lot. And we look pretty good compared to other nations. Even for people of color, even for blacks and Latinos, we got large numbers compared to other nations. Down here, someplace down there, it says, in raw numbers at least, our high-achieving Hispanic and black American students outnumber high achievers of several other countries. So we've got folks who are getting it done. We've got high achievers among us, and part of the implication of this kind of thing is the diversity within our population. There are some people who are doing just fine, who are achieving high levels, who are getting really good jobs, for whom life is great. But then there are a lot who aren't keeping up. And we got to worry about everybody. Okay. When we talk about achievement gaps, we sometimes think we're mainly talking about people who are disadvantaged, for the families don't have a lot of education. This chart shows that the gaps are largest. This is reading scores for 12th graders by race, ethnicity, and parental education level. The top blue line is whites, the middle green line is Hispanics, the bottom line is blacks. But what you see is the gap is the largest among the children of the most educated. Okay, so our kids. That's reading, this is math. Similar picture. Okay, so work to do. Now, why should we think we can do this? Why should we think excellence with equity is possible? Several reasons. First, at age 1, there aren't many differences at all. It looks like we start from group proportional equality. And I'll show you some chart, a little picture in a minute that will show a bit more than that. We start with group proportional equality, then we move away from it. And I'm going to argue that we need to start very early in childhood so we never even move away from it. Okay, we don't need to lose what we started with. Second, evidence that IQ gaps have diminished. People often talk about IQ gaps as if that's really the biologic measure of things. Well, 30% of the black-white IQ gap disappeared between 1971 and 2001, over a 30-year period. 30% of something people said was written in stone went away. Okay, there's no plausible or no evidence that genetic differences are the source of these differences in achievement we're talking about. There's studies that cut both ways. It could even be that the genetic difference flips the other way. Okay, people generate skills through their life experience, and we got to start giving all of our kids the kinds of life experiences that equip them with the skills and dispositions that we want them to have. Trend for 17-year-olds. The reading score gap for 17-year-old blacks versus whites diminished by 62% in 17 years from 1971 through 1988. Again, 62% of a gap that people thought was written in stone was gone in less than 2 decades. The math gap was 25 to 30%, disappeared over roughly the same period. For 9-year-olds, we've had pretty steady progress. It stops and starts, but black and Latino kids have come up more over the last 30 years or so than white kids have, but even white kids have gotten better. So that's the kind of progress you want to get to group proportional equality with excellence. Okay, everybody comes up, but the folk groups that are furthest behind come up farther and faster. The 9-year-olds, that's kind of the pattern that we have. For the 17-year-olds, though, what's happened is we made a lot of progress between 1970 and 1990, especially during the 1980s, and then progress stopped at the end of the 1980s. And we don't have there's debate on why progress stopped at the end of the 1980s, but the fact that we made so much progress during the 70s and 80s shows it can be done. We just got to get started in making it really happen again. And then finally, exemplary schools are showing the way. There are schools around the country that are hitting home runs with everybody. We need to learn more about how they do that so that we can share that knowledge around. When we think about movements, I want to point out that policies are the fourth line down on here. The movement is a collection of all of us that feel a sense of urgency and a sense of possibility. We're never going to agree on the goals in detail, though. So goals is the next line down. And it's good that we don't agree on the goals because people spread themselves across the work. Okay, you can chop up age ranges and the developmental work that needs to go on in each age range. And some people think one period is more important than the other. You can take 0 to 3 for the early brain development, and then the 3 to 5 for getting ready for a school, and the 5 to 9 from the period where you learn to read and get mathematically a bit literate, and the 9 to 14 early adolescence and identity consolidation, or at least in the direction of identity consolidation, the 14 to 18 for high school and preparing to transition into adulthood, and 18 to 24, 25, the actual transition. There's developmental work to happen during every one of those periods. And there are different domains in which that work happens in each period, and we need to spread ourselves across all that. So it's good that each of us, that we disagree about what the most important work is, because then we get a division of labor where we divide ourselves across that work. But in any case, there are goals, but then for any given goal, we need strategies. People need recipes. Okay? You say you want kids to be more ready for school. Well, what does that mean you should do differently? Okay, sometimes the people who have that goal don't know what the strategy would look like to actually follow it through. But collectively, for any particular strategy, we need policies to provide the authorizations and the resources that enable us to act out those strategies. And then the work actually happens at the level of programs and projects, supported by the resources and the policies to enact the strategies. And then the form that the work actually takes is principles and practices, the way we actually interact and the things we actually do. And the principles and practices are where the rubber really meets the road, what people actually do in settings where they're trying to get this work done, including in families. And as we try to be more systematically thoughtful about getting the work done, there are questions and answers to generate at every level of this picture. How do we define the movement? What do we call it? I call it excellence with equity. Maybe there's something better to call it. How do we parse out the goals and understand one another's goals? How do we think about the strategies and share our ideas about those strategies? What policies do we need to advocate for? Okay, I'm not going to talk a whole lot today about resources and policies and advocacy, but that's a piece of it. Okay, and then what do programs and projects look like, and what do principles and practices inside those things need to look like? I'm going to talk about parents, about teachers, about peers, and about employers, and just a little bit, and then ultimately community. You put all that together, you get a picture that looks like this. That's got 5 inner circles. That little upside down blue triangle is in every one of those circles, because there are goals and strategies and policies and programs and projects inside every one of those circles. And then for each of the 5 big circles, there are 2 little circles. Okay, and I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour around that outer circle as we go through right now. So for the parents, in that top, number 1, it says authoritative parenting and learning-focused home life. And then the second one, it says effective homeschool linkages. So the number 2 is about what we often think of as parental engagement with schools and maybe even with doctors' offices and other organizations, entities outside the house. But the first one is about what happens at home, between folks at home when the doors are closed. Sometimes people don't like to talk about this, and they say that's their business, what they do at home. Well, what they do at home actually makes a big difference. And we need to deal with that in a respectful but assertive and determined way. Okay, people talk about having courage. Sometimes you got to have courage to talk about the things that need to be talked about, even if it's awkward to talk about those things. I mentioned a little while ago that at age 1, there are very few differences to speak of that we measure. Here, this is from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Survey, this chart, and we've got on the left side, we're looking at differences by parent education level, and the right side by race and ethnicity. The top bar at 1.0 is the level of children whose parents have some graduate school. They've got not only a 4-year college degree, but some education past that. So the children of the most educated parents is where that top 1.0 line is. And these are things you can measure for an infant. Explores objects, explores purposefully, jabbers expressively, trying to talk, and so on. But there really is not much difference here across these bars. And even the differences there are very likely attributable to life experience from ages birth through 1. But by age 2, the differences look like this. So the gaps open between the ages of 1 and 2. And this is by parents' education on the left side and by race and ethnicity on the right side. The tallest bars, tall blue ones on the right side where we have race ethnicity are whites. Then you have Asians, and then blacks and Hispanics, the 4 bars over there. But if the gaps open by age 2, we can't wait until kids start school to work on skills. We've got to start early. And we have a project at the Achievement Gap Initiative at Harvard that we call Seeding Success. And the idea in this project is to saturate regions, maybe initially just neighborhoods, but saturate neighborhoods with what we call the fundamental 5 messages for early childhood parenting. Okay, the fundamental 5 messages for early childhood parenting. There's research evidence for each of these. The first one, maximize love, minimize stress beginning at birth. Okay, and here the idea is to familiarize caregivers, not just parents, but caregivers, with what stress looks like for an infant and with the effect that stress can have on an infant. And then help them see, just have their antenna up a bit more to shield infants from stress. Okay, stress for an infant, for example, is having people argue and fight and making loud noises around them. Okay, or being left wet and hungry and unattended for a while. And if that happens a lot, you can have what some researchers call toxic stress that actually has chemical effects that can retard development, particularly brain development. And there's a huge amount of brain development during those first 3 years of life. Okay, and so we need to prepare people to shield their children from stress. Right now we're still doing fundraising to work with an advertising firm to produce the materials that we can use at all the different touch points in a community. Okay, think about where you can touch a parent as a touch point. The grocery store, the laundromat, the bus stop, the doctor's office, the employment setting, the school, every place you can touch a parent. We can have tailored kinds of images and experiences and materials that remind people about the fundamental 5 and give them images of what it looks like to live up to these things. Okay, so you can imagine an image where you have 2 teenagers look like they're fighting, making a lot of noise in front, and there's a baby, and grandmother's there holding a baby in her arm, and grandma's got a stern look on her face pointing toward the door and maybe shielding the baby's ears. Okay, that's an image that could have just a couple words up there that remind people to keep it down when you're around young babies. Okay, and you can imagine for all these things I'm going to talk about, just images that we can use to illustrate these. Sing, talk, sing, and use gestures to communicate with infants. It turns out there's really interesting research on how gestures help infants to understand, to help augment comprehension for infants. And infants will learn to gesture before they learn to talk. Okay, so just pointing at what you're talking about. It's that simple. Some people are trying to teach their infants sign language, and a lot of the experts on this say that's not really helping that much. But just gesturing is as good as sign language. Just pointing what you're talking about, and ideally with eye contact, so the baby has a sense that you're trying to communicate with him or her. And the talking and singing, kids are encoding language from the moment they're born and maybe even prenatal. Okay, there's some studies that suggest that babies are soothed more by singing in their mother's native language. I heard about one study, I haven't seen it, that suggests that European babies sometimes cry in the rhythm of their mother's native language. So they come out of the womb. I guess there's one language that kind of ends with a little uptick in intonation. There's another that ends with a little downtick in intonation. And the babies actually come out of the womb crying with these rhythms. Okay, so they got the sounds coming in there even in the womb. And they're encoding the language patterns from the very beginning. So if somebody's thinking, why should I talk to that baby? He don't know what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter he doesn't know what you're talking about. Just talk. One person said, just narrate life, no matter what you're doing. Just talk about it. And kids are encoding the sound patterns. Use number games and rhythm with toddlers to build foundations for numeracy. So we're trying to put together age and stage graded numbers and uses of numbers. One of the big breakthroughs for toddlers with numbers is when they realize that numbers represent sets of things. It's 4 of something. It's 5 of something. It's not just a bunch of words you say in a row. for example. Then enable and encourage spatial awareness, building that mind's eye and the ability to move around and comprehend in three-dimensional space. So imagine a 14-month-old crawling around a crowded room, imagining in his mind's eye what's on the other side of the furniture that he or she is about to crawl around. Building those neural networks to be able to do geometry later, or to run hurdles, or to write, because even writing entails coordination between sight and your mind. And then finally, discuss what you read. Don't just read. So as soon as first of all, read before they can understand what you're talking about, because again, it's sound reinforcement. But by the time that they can give you any feedback and talk back to you, it's a matter of engaging the child. Okay, and in higher and lower order reasoning. Lower order is just descriptive. What's that? Oh, that's a doggy. But you could also ask, if you were going to finish the story, how would you tell it? Or what do you think would have happened if instead of going out that door, they'd gone on the other door? Okay, just having kids think about these things. And the mnemonic is about remember, explain, anticipate. Okay, and so if you saturate neighborhoods with examples and reminders of these things, you could have a lot of babies have different life experiences. Okay, and if grandma has seen it, and older brother and sister have seen it, and everybody has seen it, and they're reminding everybody, and this is all universal. This is not targeted at any one group of people. Okay, this is human nature stuff. But folks who have more resources are tending to do more of these kinds of things already. And we're just trying to be sure nobody's left behind in understanding they need to do these kinds of things and that it has a payoff. Okay, the core notion is that we can actually shape our children's abilities. Just like an athlete can exercise for years and build muscles and get stronger and stronger, the more we exercise our brains, the stronger they get. Okay, and we just have to have everybody understand what it looks like, and then give positive reinforcement to do it. Let's see here. As they get older, one way to cut out some of the ways to think about the school-age children, and there's several ways to think about this. This is one way to break it out. We can think about the two major dimensions of parenting being how strict you are, having structure and demandingness and rules, and the other dimension being warm and responsive. Okay, children across, especially for blacks, whites, and Latinos, kids do best when they're high on both, authoritative. There's structure and demandingness, their boundaries, but inside those boundaries, lots of warmth and togetherness and positive reinforcement. Okay. There are racial differences in the degree, however, to which people are up in that quadrant. My colleague Jelani Mandara, who's a psychologist at Northwestern University, is the person who is the most acquainted me with this kind of material. Okay, when white folks get it wrong and they're not in that top quadrant, which quadrant do you think they're in? Permissive. Okay, giving the kids not that the boundaries aren't that strong, but lots of responsiveness. When black folks get it wrong, we tend to be authoritarian. We tend to be strict, but not as expressive of the warmth. You know, I'm the grown-up, I told you what to do, just do it. I don't need to know what you think, kind of thing. I mean, when the household I grew up in, why did I got to do that? What was the answer? Because I said so. Anybody heard that before? Okay. And so the idea, though, is when we are giving kids a because I said so answer and not really respecting them as adults, we're training them to fear authority and to not to expect to be respected by authority and not to advocate for themselves. Okay? At one point in time, that was a survival skill for black folks. You had to immediately obey an authority figure or get hurt. Okay? So people had to train their kids. You don't ask why, you just do what I said to do. And that was survival training. These days, it's training to be a low-skill, subordinate worker. Okay? So we need to show people what it even looks like. I had one parent that came up to me. She said, what you said sounded right, but I don't even know what it looks like. I need somebody to show me. Okay? So we need to give folks examples of what these things look like. And it's not about blame. It's not about anybody's fault. It's just about giving everybody the information that they need in order to do as well as they would like to do with their own children and relatives. Okay? So, now, teachers. A lot of my recent work has been using student surveys as measures of teaching quality. So we have what we call the 7 C's of effective teaching, which are care, captivate, confer, clarify, consolidate, challenge, and control. And we use those to measure what the students report about the quality of the teaching that they experience. And then we give that as feedback to the teachers to work on getting better, to work on improving their skills as teachers. And what we find that the Gates Foundation Project on Measures of Effective Teaching found that the composite of these were quite reliable as predictors of learning gains. In other words, how much kids learn, how much their test scores go up from one year to the next. And the student surveys are actually more dependable measures than either adult observations or the test scores themselves. Okay? If you look at the same teacher in 2 different classes, and you measure the same teacher in different classes, and you measure them just with their value-added achievement gains, in other words, you take how much the kids learn from year to year in one class versus the other, and you ask how much correlated those are. In the MET data that we have, it's about 0.38 correlation between the 2 classes. You take something like an observational framework where adults have watched the class, and you've had a couple different adults watch the class, rate the class, and come up with a number, and you've done that for both classes, the correlation between the classes is 0.41. If you take the student survey responses between the 2 classes, the correlation between the classes is 0.61. Okay? You got 20 kids there 180 days a year all day. They know what's going on in that classroom, right? And so we get quite reliable feedback from the students, and then we can give that back to the teachers and embed that in professional learning activities so that the teachers can get better, both individually and as a community. When we talk about what actually predicts, it turns out that challenge, in other words, pressing kids to work hard even when the work gets, don't give up when it gets hard. Try to understand it, not just memorize it. That's what challenge is about. Control is having them stay busy, cooperate, behave themselves, not waste a lot of time. Those 2, challenge and control, along with clarify, are the strongest predictors of learning from one year to the next. On the other hand, care, confer, captivate, which is about making it interesting and stimulating, are strong predictors of how happy kids are in the classroom and whether they agree that their teacher inspires them to want to go to college. So if we want inspiration and happiness at the same time that we want persistence and hard work and on-task behaviors, we need teaching that's good on all these dimensions. Okay, and some teachers really are good on all these kinds of dimensions. And so working with schools to help teachers know what it looks like to teach at a really high level is also part of the work that we need to do. Because teachers and parents is nothing more important than teachers and parents in shaping kids' learning experiences. Just that 4.8 months there, just to tell you without reviewing all the numbers, if we take all the teachers, almost 3,000 classrooms were in this project. It's the biggest teacher quality research project the world's ever seen. Almost 3,000 classrooms measured with several different kinds of metrics. If you take all those teachers and line them up from the ones that were rated highest by their students all the way down to the ones that were rated lowest by their students, and then you look at the middle 50%, like the 25th percentile up to the 75th percentile, and you ask how much difference in learning is predicted by being at the 75th versus the 25th. In mathematics, in middle school, that's what that 4.8 months is. Half a year. Just based on what the kids told you about what they experienced instructionally, half a year difference in learning at the top and the middle and the bottom of the middle 50%. And even more, obviously, as you go out to the 90-10 instead of the 50-75 comparison. So that's just to say that we have evidence that teaching matters, and we are learning more and more about what it is about teaching that matters. And we're at the place now where we just got to get in there and help the professional learning communities use this kind of knowledge to get better. I should say as a footnote, if we had more time, I would have had you vote on which of the 7 C's you thought was the most strongest predictor of learning. Most audiences, the majority of people vote care. Some audiences, nobody at all votes control. Control is the strongest predictor. Control is our class stays busy, doesn't waste time. Students behave the way my teacher wants them to. Disagreement with the statement, the way students behave in this class makes our teacher angry. Okay, just a classroom that's on task a lot of the time. I had one colleague that watched classes one year, and between the classes that were making high gains and low gains, there were several months difference on time on task during the year. Okay, if you have a teacher who takes 15 minutes to get the kids all settled in their classes at the beginning of the day, then before recess they kind of start winding it down 10 minutes before recess, and then after recess it takes some more time, and then before lunch they start winding it down, then after lunch it takes some time, and again at the end of the day, and if there's any other interruption, you can have two classrooms side by side where you got 2 or 3 months differences in time on task during the school year. The first thing I ever learned in this field was that time on task makes a big difference. Okay, so that's that. If we have more time, we can say more. Let me hurry and get through the rest of this. Peers, friends, the way kids treat each other. Turns out that a lot of kids do not like their peer culture of achievement, the things in their peer culture that affect achievement, but they think everybody else likes it. And so we have a project that we call the Conspiracy to Succeed. And it's about working with young people to undermine aspects of their own peer culture that get in the way of learning. We did a little survey, and I know you can't see the words. I'll tell you what's on here. The question was, list some things that students at your school do so that other students will like them. And it was an open-ended question. They could say anything they wanted, and we kind of grouped the questions. It's almost entirely negative. You get antisocial behavior like fighting, cursing, indifference toward other people, academically disruptive behavior like acting out, skipping class, cheating, pulling stunts, acting like you don't care about school, things related to dress and looks, copying other people, being peer pressured, sucking up to other people, and just a lot of not terribly positive stuff. Is things that kids do so that other people will like them. The next question was, if you were in charge and you could set the rules for what's cool, what would you have be cool? Work ethic, trying hard in school, going to class, being responsible, following rules, achieving your goals, being nice, respecting others, being fun, caring about family and friends, being interesting, making friends. It's entirely positive. So the stuff they list as what people do to be liked is all mischief. What they would like to have be cool is entirely positive. And the next question was, what would you make not cool? It's the kind of stuff on the first list. So if most of them want the positive stuff to be cool, why do they put up with all the negative stuff? It's because they think everybody else likes it. There is a phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance. It's been in the literature since 1934, I think it is. And it has to do with when people misunderstand and just misestimate other people's values and preferences. And then they change their own behavior in order to fit in with the other people whose values and preferences they have misread. There's been other studies that use this idea to intervene on college campuses with regard to drug use and sexuality, where everybody else thinks everybody else likes it and is much more engaged than people's preferences would really say they are. And they've actually produced statistically significant reductions in self-destructive behavior on college campuses by familiarizing people with what other folks really think. Okay, so the idea in middle schools and high schools is to collect these kinds of numbers and help people understand what their classmates really would like to have. I told them what people would like to have be cool, and they were flabbergasted. And then they said, well, let's work on it. And so now they're working on flipping their own culture. Okay, so that's the peers piece. Okay, so with the parents, we need those fundamental 5. We need to saturate communities so that we reach more than just the people who come to programs. So if you're in these communities, there's no way you could miss it because it's everywhere. Okay. Then in the schools, we need to have teachers understand more what good teaching looks like and have supports for that. With the peers, we need to work on that stuff. And there's one little idea here, and I'm going to wrap up in a second. Particularly with the peer piece, sometimes we have this arrangement where Think of these as two different kinds of skills, skill type 1, skill type 2. Think of A, B, and C as being 3 kids. A is better at skill 2 than at skill 1. C is better at skill 1 than skill 2. And B is not as good as either of them at either skill. And so some of our kids in our schools are like B, and it's better to look lazy than stupid. Okay, so the kids who feel like they can't do it, who are struggling even when they try hard, are the ones that are acting out a lot, so that other people will have an attribution, have a reason to apply to why is he not doing that well? And it's better to have people, it's because he just doesn't care about school. Okay, rather than, he's just not very smart. So B is worried about not looking very smart. Okay? And we got a lot of kids like that. We have a lot of kids who are who are below average on every dimension. Okay, they're not good athletes. They're not big like the other kids. Okay, and they're not feeling very good about themselves. And even if they're not acting out, they're not acting in their own best interest all the time. Okay, so, but what if there was a point out there that something that needed to get done in the world, that was out there where that green dot is? Who's in the lead to get to the green dot? B, right? Nobody else is going there. Okay? And B might be something really important that needs to be done in the world. And even as we work on the conspiracy to succeed and have our kids try to flip their culture, we need to also give them a sense of purpose. Why are you here? I was 8 years old when I asked somebody, what is it you do as a job for a grown-up in order to make things better, to help people? Okay? And they said city planning. So I grew up planning to be a city planner. And I knew I wanted to go to a good college, and I knew you needed good grades in high school in order to get into a good college. So I worked really hard in high school. I took 8th grade off. I did no homework in 8th grade. Okay? Because I knew I was going to have to work hard beginning in 9th grade. And I said, let me, get ready. And I don't think my parents said anything to me. I just can't remember that. So, but I worked really hard in high school, and I got into a good college, and the rest is history. But that sense of purpose is why I worked hard in high school. Okay? And we have to give all our kids a sense of purpose and have them try to find where their green dot is, including for the ones for whom 4-year college degrees is probably not the right fit. And that can become really controversial, because who's going to choose the person for whom a 4-year college degree is not a good fit? And the fact that we are afraid to choose, afraid to have that conversation, means we don't have it. And so all of our options for kids who are not going to get a 4-year college degree are underdeveloped. And we have millions of young people lost because we didn't develop good pathways other than 4-year college degrees. It's like we got a big interstate highway leading from 4th grade all the way up through a 4-year college degree. And we don't worry about the rest of the street system because nobody's going there. We're sending everybody the college route, the College for All movement, right? But the fact is the majority are going the other way. Only about 1/3 of young Americans finish college. Maybe 20% or less of African Americans these days. Now, if we double that, we still got a lot of kids who need another way. So we need to give kids a little menu of green dots. Well, here's a few things you might do. Because if we do that, then everybody keeps going, everybody finds their own form of success. And with regard to any particular a little arrow there, once they found their green dot, they're in the lead. Don't worry about anybody else because they aren't going where you're going. We each have our own destination. We got to figure out what it is. All right? Then employers need to help the schools to make the teaching more relevant. We need to use the employers to help people find their green dot. This little program begins in 5th grade in one set of Boston schools where they bring in people to tell their life stories beginning when they were in 5th grade. And they bring in people who have a whole range of careers. So you bring in a truck driver and the mailman, but you also bring in a brain surgeon and some other people. So kids see a whole range of possibilities for what their green dot might be. Right? And employers can help us with that. They can help to make curriculum relevant. They can help to give kids jobs. They can help with the whole school to career piece. We have a project called Pathways to Prosperity that is focused on this piece of it. And then finally, bring the community together so that the whole community develops a sense of shared responsibility for young people. The circle number 9 says programmatic supports for families, children, and youth, particularly for families that are needy, homeless families where the kids don't have any place to study. Being sure that families that are needy have their needs met. This is number 9. Number 10 is places to connect, belong, contribute, ways for communities to come together and build that sense of solidarity, that sense of shared collective endeavor to get the work done. Okay? And what I'm suggesting to you is that all of that work in those 10 circles I just sped around through is part of a movement. These things are linked with regard to the purposes that people have when they pursue this work. And they're going to pursue it, and we are going to pursue it with greater energy if we understand we're part of something much bigger than ourselves. That these things are connected, that we need to encourage and support one another in doing this work, all with the purpose of giving young people the lived experiences that equip them with the skills and dispositions that they're going to need to thrive in this century. I didn't give you the numbers on how dire the situation is right now for our young people who don't finish high school. They're very depressing numbers. Even for our people who do finish high school and go on to community colleges, only a small minority finish community college, a 2-year degree. Some of that has to do with the poor quality of the institutions and the fact that they don't have the resources that they need and they aren't providing high-quality services. We need to fix that. And some of it has to do with the low skill levels that young people have when they arrive at these institutions. And we need to work on all of that stuff, right? But if we get the family stuff right, we can stop the achievement gaps from opening before they start, I suggest to you. Maybe not totally. Maybe there's still some things that you got to have a lot of money to do. But those fundamental 5, you don't have to have a lot of money to do those things. Okay? Authoritative parenting is the way you're interacting with your kids. Maybe you can't do that when you're totally stressed out. If you don't have resources, you're more likely to be totally stressed out. But we ought to reach families with this information to at least give them the chance. Okay? Some people say, they're not going to use that information. They're worried about how to pay their rent. And they're stressed out. I said, well, give them the information and let them at least try. Okay? I grew up in a household that worried about paying the rent too, but we had time to do some things. Okay? So, I've talked longer than I was supposed to, I think, or maybe about... But I'm going to end with a poem. Question is which one? I think I'm going to do this one. This is a poem I wrote for high school teachers who were upset with their students to try to get them to be more empathetic with their students. And it's called Hardships and Distractions. Going to have my dinner at my grandma's house today. My mom's is staying late for work to make some extra pay. Got a lot of homework, but I'm worried about my mom, so it makes it hard to concentrate. My mind feels like a bomb. Also got to make sure I wash some clothes to wear, and I got to get that stuff I need to tame my crazy hair. And while I'm doing that, I'll use the phone to make some calls to tell my friends the time and place for Friday at the mall. And sometime between now and then, I got to get some dough because I ain't going to the mall all destitute and po. I know I should focus on that test I got in math, but my English paper's due soon too. I need some help, real bad. Some teachers think I just don't care. Some think I'm not trying. I think I'm caught in a trap. Sometimes I just start crying. But no one ever sees my tears because I just show the tough side. I like to seem real in control, if not book smart, then streetwise. I wish my teachers understood what it's like to be me, to see my life the way I do, the whole complexity. They see how hard it is to keep so many things in focus. They see how blurry things can get, how stuff can seem so hopeless. My teacher said I best be ready when I take that test in math, but I ain't got no help at home. I never knew my dad. I want to go to college, but for that I need good grades, and based on what my grades are now, there may not be a way. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need someone who's wise to help me figure out which way to turn, to empathize. But let me stop daydreaming because I got a lot to do. If I don't start my homework soon, I never will get through. If I try and still can't do it, well, just won't hand it in. But if I don't try, I'll never know. So here goes. I'll begin. Every day I pray to find someone to guide me and to care. Is there any chance that you could be the answer to my prayer. So all of us want to be the answer to kids' prayers in this way, and we just have to support each other to keep pushing forward to get the work done. I'll stop with that.
Thank you. Very, very well done. At this time, we'll entertain some questions. There are some microphones around, and we'll start over there.
How you doing, Doctor? So your sights and goals are very close to Bronfenbrenner's ecological model.
Yep.
So it's fascinating that this work is has been around so long, but I'm finding myself, and I guess many of us are still finding ourselves having these conversations with individuals who, leaders who actually could operationalize equity, and they could put things in place, programs in place to really give access, equal access to all students. So I'm just wondering, how do we go about really operationalizing equity?
Okay.
How do we make turn this theory into practice? What are your thoughts?
We kind of need to distinguish the things that we can do without conflict, the things that we aren't stepping on anybody's toes to do, where we don't have to take anybody's stuff to do it, from the thing where we do have to step on somebody's toes to do it, where there's a vested interest that's standing in the way of us getting it done. Okay, where there's a vested interest standing in the way, you've got to do the politics to get it done. And when there isn't, you just got to do the organizing. Okay? Now, there's a layer in the system that's missing a lot of the time. And that is the layer that helps to coordinate resources and just if you went into a city and said, well, how are we doing on this? Nobody could tell you, because nobody's keeping track of it, right? And so one of the things that some people are beginning to talk more about are intermediary organizations. Sometimes I call them engines. Some people like to call them backbone organizations that really help to understand the whole region. And what you need is the people who control resources, the top CEOs of the corporations, the hospital presidents, the university presidents, the elected officials, to come together and to declare this will happen. Okay? And then they need an agent, an entity that helps to coordinate their intention, to help to follow through and make it happen. The best example of it I know these days is in Cincinnati. There's a thing called Strive, Cincinnati Strive. And they're now trying to replicate around the country with an organization called Strive Together. Okay? But all the power brokers come together. They have an organization that coordinates and helps all the frontline service delivery organizations start to align all their efforts. Okay? There can be resentment from activists in the neighborhoods. They can say, hey, you're doing this to us and not with us. And so then you got to do the politics, bring people into it. But one way or another, it's coming together around your collective desire to have a coherent, nurturing environment for your children, and having institutions whose job it is to keep track of whether the pieces are there, right? And we need really good young people to work in those engines or backbone organizations, okay? To convene people who need to coordinate with one another, to monitor and measure, to hold accountable. We got a lot of organizations that are receiving money that are producing no benefit, who need to lose their contracts and have those contracts go to others. Okay, the mechanisms to make that happen needs to be in place. And so a lot of it, just like in a market economy, government steps in to take care of market failures. In our social world, there's stuff that doesn't quite work right if nobody's kind of not helping it, and it's not a role for government. It needs to be public or quasi-public in the civic sphere so that it can be maintained across the election cycles. And so we hold elected officials accountable for supporting it and not politicizing it. Okay? So it's a political thing. It's always political if there are resources to be moved around. Okay? But it's in the civic sphere. And right now we've not developed that in the society, and I think we're just starting to in a few different ways around a few different things. And I think that's part of how, otherwise we just keep, you're right, saying the same stuff to one another and it never happens. But there's a sense of urgency now. Okay? Business people are understanding that they're not going to have a workforce pretty soon. Huge amounts of the baby boom generation are retiring over the next 10 years. Are you going to have people who are coming in with the skills to learn to do some of the things that are going to need to be done at that time? We've already got an army of unemployed and underemployed young people for whom we don't quite know how they're ever going to connect with the world of work. Okay? And people are seeing that and they're knowing we got to do something about it. It's our generation's responsibility to do something about that. So it's a long answer to a short question. Okay. Stay on this side and then come across. Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Ferguson. My name is Nkemjika Ofadale. I'm a fifth-year doctoral student in the Education Leadership and Policy Studies Department. Thank you so much for your discussion. This is right on target with my actual dissertation, so I'm pretty excited to hear you speak. Big fan of the Tripod and MET project. So, my challenge to you is that when you talked about the 7 C's that are salient to effective teaching, there's a lot of research right now speaking to culturally relevant instruction.
Right.
So do you think that an 8th C could potentially be culture? That's the first part. Second question, with the responses from the student surveys, which was actually my dissertation proposal, but I kind of moved away from students and moved to teachers.
Right.
Did you see that there was a trend in students asking for some sort of being able to see themselves within their classroom, so that cultural piece, were students able to report about that in the survey response? Thank you.
Okay. No, I don't want culture to be the 8th C. I want culture to cut across all the C's. Okay? So I can show you, we have a table where I show what a culturally responsive, culturally sensitive approach to each C is. Okay? And you can walk, because you want all instruction to be responsive to who your kids are. Okay? And the cultural piece is one angle on relevance, but there are other angles on relevance too, right? And so we want kids to be stimulated, excited, to see the stuff that's relevant, and there's a whole bundle of things that comes into that. I don't find that kids often ask to see themselves, but they appreciate it when they do. Okay? So, because kids are not really they're not architects of the stuff. They're not sitting back dreaming up the ideals. But when they see it, they appreciate it. The other thing kids appreciate is seeing somebody who looks like them who's important. They actually don't care that much what race or gender or age their teacher is. As one kid said, what matters is they care and they deliver. Okay? But they do want to see somebody in their school or come through their school who other people look up to and respect and who they can vicariously identify with and say, hey, I could be like that. Okay? And again, they don't care, about the identity characteristics of their teacher, but obviously they care their teacher is sensitive and responsive. Okay? Again, you care and you deliver to me. So the things you issue are in the picture, but I think I may have them a different location in the picture. Okay? Yes?
Thank you for your sharing, Dr. Ferguson. I'm Oduno Tariq, and I'm probably one of a few people who happen to have been at some of the initial Charles H. Thompson colloquium. A former dean here, Dean Evans Crawford, would always suggest to us the interaction of the gown and the town. And if there's one person under the sound of my voice who may not know what that is, that means that those who are on the academic campus, and as Dr. Ferguson mentioned earlier, to bring in people from different skill
Could you
sets.
hold the mic just a couple more inches from your mouth, just a little further down? Because you get a lot of echo. I'll keep going. That's a lot better.
As I was saying, Dr. Crawford talked about the town and the gown.
Right.
I'm reminded of Ichabod Fluellen, who worked with books in Cleveland, Ohio. How can we expand the town with the gown and make it not only relevant, but how can we make it excellent, greater than what we presently find ourselves doing?
Yeah. That's not an easy question, because a lot of the gown ran away from the town, right? And so you're trying to bring the gown and the town together. But the distance may not be as big as it seems, because a lot of people who live out, are you talking like the town and the gown within the race or across races?
What I'm talking about is both.
All right. Well, within the race, a lot of the folks that you would identify with the gown have close relatives who are in the town, so to speak. And so trying to raise people's consciousness and sense of obligation and responsibility to help their extended families is one piece of it, right? The challenge is trying to have people who have more, who've got more resources, who live in places that are very safe. The challenge is finding opportunities to come together with the rest of with the community. I guess maybe somebody's got to convene the meeting, right?
You just slightly missed me.
I'm missing your point?
I said you slightly missed me. The resources in the town are as profound as the resources in terms of the gown.
Except that the gown doesn't find those resources as useful, right?
Well, maybe we need to reactivate something in the gown. As an example, my 12-year-old grandson attends school, the middle school here at Howard University. And there's reasons why Howard University got rid of their lab school. That was an error. However, they did not attempt to go to a productiveness because they came back to having a school on campus.
Okay, well, you're raising issues that we could talk about for hours, right? You're talking about social class dynamics within the group, within the race. Okay.
Well, not just in the race, but I'm talking about
even
in the
within
society.
we got an issue, but then we go between, we got additional issues.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson.
Okay. Thank you for raising the issue. I'm sorry I don't have an easy answer to it.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Good evening, Dr. Ferguson. My name is Larry Sanders. I'm a senior political science major, English minor from Detroit, Michigan, here at Howard. And your initial conversation about moving the gap altogether, the creation of the
group proportional equality.
The group proportional equality. My question kind of pertains to private education and socioeconomically affluent, and how we would engage.
Did you say private education?
Private education, and trying to, I guess, engage them as far as it goes with. I guess, do you anticipate like any kickback? Do you think that they would not be willing, I guess, to engage with the plans here, because with their resources they don't necessarily have to? You know what I mean? So how would we engage them and make them want to participate in a project such as this?
And the them again is who?
The social economically affluent people who have the means to.
I'm not sure I would spend a whole lot of. Well, it's some of that might be a waste of time. Okay, I mean there are really effective schools serving all kinds of kids from all kinds of backgrounds. You don't always hear about them. You hear about the charter schools that are doing really well because they have advocates that trumpet their successes. But if you take just regular kids in regular schools, there are some, but you look at the data, they're equal to the charter schools, right? So I think we have to go out, we have to find out what the people who are doing the best work are doing. We have to help people across all kinds of schools learn how to do that. We have to have leadership in those schools that get it done. Okay, my inclination is a lot of people think integration and economic and other forms is really important. I think it's a nice thing to do, but I don't think we have to do it in order to make huge progress in bringing kids up. I think if we put really good teaching in front of kids, if you give kids' parents the preparation they need to do, to get some of this stuff done. They can make a lot of progress. And if you think about the resources that it takes to do that versus using your resources, trying to bring in folks who have more resources, because the people who have more resources aren't necessarily doing that much better. Okay? When you take value-added achievement gains numbers, in other words, how much kids learn from year to year, you get a totally different picture than what you look at the levels. I've rank ordered all the high schools in Massachusetts by how much your kids learn from grade 8 to 10. If I published that stuff, I could reorder the property value structure of the Boston metropolitan region. Okay? Because there are schools that have high average test scores where the kids aren't learning anything in high school. They already had those. They were already there in 8th grade. Okay? And you've got schools that have had very little attention that you wouldn't notice that are making really big gains because they're taking kids who are low and bringing them up to average. Okay? And they stay in another school another 2 years, they're even better than that. So my own predilection is to try to work on the quality of instruction delivered in schools almost as they're currently constituted. And there are places that have done it with the teachers they have without changing them over much. But it's a matter of putting supports and information and enlightenment into the schools at the same time that you put some academic press in there. You have leadership, including teacher leadership, where people hold each other accountable. Okay? And they work and they rise. I mean, we have a report on our AGI website, agi.harvard.edu. There's a report on exemplary high schools, or how high schools become exemplary. Most of those schools did it without any socioeconomic integration. They just did it by improving the way they deliver education. Okay? And so it's not my agenda to bring the town to the gown or to worry that much about the social class mixing. I just want good teaching and good parenting, and I reach people where they are to get it done and applaud the people who are working on the other agenda when they make more progress.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. One more?
Yes. Hi, Dr. Ferguson. Thank you for your talk. I wanted to, I understand the importance of the achievement gap, of closing it, and as an early childhood educator, I understand what you said about parenting and early childhood. As someone who works with teachers, though, what we see is that these things are important, but they're being delivered in a way that makes good teaching and learning difficult. So how do we focus on closing the achievement gap, but not sacrificing good education to too much testing and too much teaching to the test and narrowing the curriculum? One of the things about early childhood that we're noticing is children don't get to play anymore. Yeah. And play drives learning. And so if we remove all the play so that they can pass the test, we're doing these kids a disservice. And when you look at the high-scoring international countries, they're great test takers, but they're not creative. And they're not innovative because they weren't given that chance in their childhood. So I want to balance the need to close the gap, but do it in a way that's kind of authentic to what we know is good education. And so I just want to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
The magic word in what you said is balance. Okay? We've got to have ways of expressing what the balance is, recognizing it when it's appropriate, and addressing it when it's not appropriate. I don't want to give up on test scores. I mean, when you're a teacher in the class, you can affect what happens directly. If you're a principal or a superintendent or a policymaker and you want to have some effect on education, you need some way of calibrating how things are going. Okay? And tests or things that are like tests are kind of our only way to know how things are going. And using tests, we know that in one school you can have somebody who's only producing a half a year or 2 years or 2/3 of a year's worth of progress per year, and somebody else next door is producing 2 years worth of progress per year. And there are differences in effectiveness that we need to understand and use to help the ones that aren't making that much progress to make more progress. But you're right, that we can get too preoccupied with trying to maximize the test score, and then you just make a mess. So we need to have balanced metrics. And those 7 C's that I talked about, care and confer and captivate, are about interacting with kids, giving them all kinds of positive reinforcement, making the lessons fascinating. Consolidate is about integration, tying it together, making it coherent, summarizing, linking forward and backward. Okay, clarify is about explaining things clearly, clearing up confusion. And then we have challenge and control, which are the ones that actually predict test scores the most, which are about pushing kids to understand and not just memorize, to persist when things get hard, and to stay focused and on task. We can work with teachers on all 7 of those things to get better in a balanced way And those first C's that we call the support C's will deal with some of the more socio-emotional stuff that you're talking about over here. So we need balance. I think we may get more of the balance as we get more of the evidence. Right now, the evidence that has been the focus for the last couple of years has all been about test scores and effectiveness of raising value-added test scores. Okay, again, the first time I really got interested in test scores was at the end of the 1980s when we started to have the data to look at how test scores predict earnings. I was an economist doing economic development at the time and saw that test scores measured 10 years earlier predicted most of the hourly wage gap between black and white young adults. That's when I got really interested in test scores. I say, because tests are measuring skills that employers pay for. And so we need to do what we need to do in order to get kids those skills so that when they go into the market, they can compete, right? And so test scores are useful measures, but as you say, we can measure other stuff. And we need to do it all in balance and to have the public debates and all the rest of it that we need to work that out. So I agree. I think that was the last one, did you say? Okay.
Okay, at this time we have a gift for you. Dean?
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Ferguson, thank you for reminding us that it's movement time again. Even though we are nearly 2 decades into a new millennium, these issues continue to persist, and this is the audience that will make a difference as we push toward 2050. These are the practitioners and the scholars, the researchers, the policymakers who will make a difference so that this intransigent conversation does go by the wayside. So on behalf of the School of Education faculty and students, alumni, and Board of Visitors, I present you with this crystal apple. This is given to individuals who advance the mission and goal and vision of the School of Education to prepare reflective practitioners, leaders of change, and engaged researchers. And we view you as someone who epitomizes all of those things. So thank you for your presence here today.
Thank you.
One other thing, I just want to recognize the selection committee. I want them identified who did the hard work in getting Dr. Ferguson here, and that's chaired by, and Wade, why don't you give us a stand up here, Dr. Wade Boykins, and Dr. Will Johnson, and Lois Harrison Jones, and Dr. Don Williams, and Dr. Wilma Bonner. So we really appreciate your effort in getting them here. And tomorrow we'll start up again at 10:30 and selecting our speaker, keynoter for next year. So at this time, we'll end the session. Dr. Ferguson will be here with us here now, as well as in our reception area down in the gallery lounge. So see you down there and see you next year.